Alex Pereira is getting knocked out if Magomed Ankalaev watches this video. Hi, I'm Josh from Dialectic of Violence. So I'm here today with a little bit of a different concept for the channel. So this is part of a series that I'm calling Dr. Fistenstein's Laboratory. So the idea is to basically construct what is the ideal matchups to defeat particular fighters that look unbeatable at the time. So we all know about Alex Pereira, current UFC light heavyweight champion, been absolutely cutting a path of destruction through both the middleweight and the light heavyweight divisions now, and it just seems like nobody can stand with him. Now, the easy answer to try to say, what kind of fighter would be able to beat Alex Pereira would be, a submission heavyweight grappler, maybe a Hamzat, or if he's strong enough, or maybe even Dricus du Plessis could do it. But I thought it would be much more interesting to look at how to outstrike Alex Pereira, if such a thing is possible. Now, 2-division Glory kickboxing champion, 2-division UFC champion now, devastating left hook, crazy power, great fight IQ, deceptive power for his build, dense bones, strange rotational torque. But there are openings. He wasn't undefeated in kickboxing. He isn't undefeated in MMA. So I'm going to look at how to build a fighter to beat Alex Pereira. And for those of you that are maybe less inclined to these sort of theoretical discussions, towards the end of the video, I am going to look at, is Ankalaev the person that's going to be able to actually do this? And if not, are there anyone else that are top contenders in the light heavyweight division that might be able to pull it off? Once again, I'm Josh. Welcome to Dialectic of Violence, Episode 1 of Dr. Fistenstein's Laboratory series, Beating Alex Pereira. In preparation for this project, I studied both fights from Alex Pereira's kickboxing career, including all of his defeats in kickboxing that I could find, and also several of his close run victories, as well as the entirety of his UFC career thus far. I have noticed a couple of defensive vulnerabilities. So whilst Alex Pereira is an exceptional counter striker and is very, very good at distance control, he does get a little bit complacent with that. He is prone to tall man defense, which makes sense as he is a very tall man. So for those that are a little bit less acquainted with that concept, tall man defense is stuff like pulling your head away from oncoming shots, leaning back, basically taking advantage of the fact that if you're adding a little bit of extra distance, most opponents aren't going to be able to reach you. The problem with this defense is that whilst it can look really, really flashy and can be quite effective when you've really got a good sense of your opponent's reach and timing, it is really easy in the heat of the moment to make a miscalculation and to really pay for it. Aside from that, he also has quite a wide guard. This is not completely uncommon for counter punches. You do see some less sophisticated strikers that are big on counters, such as Davison Figueiredo down at originally flyweight, now bantamweight, will do stuff like that. But he likes to sort of keep his hands quite wide so that he can parry punches, or that he can swing a short left hook around the side of a oncoming straight punch. But these, like any form of defense, can be exploited. The most effective way of dealing with tall man defense is to use extended punching combinations. Throughout his kickboxing career, there were several opponents that managed to best him utilizing extended punching combinations, among them Yusri Balgarui, Adam Vakatov, Artur Kashenko, Sergey Mazloboyev, Jason Wilness, and if you aren't convinced about that, say, oh, well, that was kickboxing, it's a different rule set. Jan Blachowicz also did very well in the third round of their match by utilizing the so-called Blacko Blitz, where Blachowicz will charge forward, throwing punches with alternating hands. It looks a little bit silly at times. It has got Blachowicz caught in the past against Thiago Santos, most notably. But against Alex Pereira, he found that the awkward timing actually led to him maybe blocking or parrying the first punch, but the second or third making their mark. Another effective means to deal with taller fighters in general is also to focus on body work. It's really difficult to lean out of the way and not expose your body, because your body has to stay stationary around your center of gravity whilst leaning back from punches to the head. And also it's just more difficult in general to cover every area. Body work has been effectively used against Alex Pereira by some of his opponents, most recently Jan Blachowicz, but also Artem Vakatov has done a lot of effective body work, and notably Jason Wilness actually managed to TKO Alex Pereira with a body shot. Other means of doing damage to Alex Pereira when in close quarters is frame offense. Now, what I mean by this is when you are framing off of someone and striking, that is typically when you are placing like a arm on something like their bicep or their forearm, basically in a situation where you can push or manipulate with your hands what their positioning is going to be, and to a degree what their posture is going to be. The most notable example of someone effectively using frame offense against Alex Pereira was actually Israel Adesanya, particularly in the first of their 2 MMA bouts. So whilst Adesanya ultimately did come up short, losing by 5th round TKO, as I'm sure many of you know, he was actually ahead on the scorecards, and that was actually quite effective because it's hard to lean back or parry a punch when your wrist is getting pulled out from under you and a shot is being thrown off of the top. It allows them to actually be thrown in pretty close and pretty fast, and it's really hard to fire an accurate counter shot off if you're Alex Pereira, if your stance is a little unstable or you're having to reset. Aside from Adesanya, Adam Vakhtov also used this tactic pretty effectively against him in kickboxing, although there is a lot less dexterity available with frame striking generally in kickboxing because of the larger gloves. But, Alex is in MMA now, so this is something that opponents can exploit. When fighting against someone as technically proficient and as experienced as Alex Pereira, sometimes it's necessary to adopt some more unorthodox tactics. I think an effective way of countering Alex Pereira, or at least getting some offense going without being punished with a devastating counter shot, is through the use of rhythm shifts. Now, when I say rhythm shifts, what I mean is both in terms of directionality and timing. So what you'll find is in striking sports in general, and particularly at the higher level, you'll often find that the fighters almost seem to be working to a little bit of a rhythm. It's almost a little bit like a dance at times, and you can see that with a lot of heavy feinters. They sort of are rocking back and forth, their hands are going a certain way. They may be shifting up exactly their placement of the different parts of their body, but there is a noticeable, recognizable rhythm to it. Because that is sort of more efficient and it allows them to sort of spring out from certain positions, that tends to be pretty common. The exact details depend on the different person and what exactly their style looks like. But sudden, rapid shifts in tempo or in direction can throw off experienced strikers who have sort of got into cruise control mode in their fights, especially if they feel like they're in control. All of a sudden, an explosive person suddenly throws something in a completely different direction, or they shift up their level, or they shift up where they're coming from, the left or the right. So there are instances of relatively effective use of that. I mean, unsurprisingly, Yuri Prochazka, I know that it's sort of become fashionable to say, he's had absolutely no success in Alex, and frankly, that second fight was a pretty bad performance from him. In the first fight, he did actually have some success and was ahead on the scorecards before getting KO'd, and he did quite well in throwing Pereira off with his rhythm, particularly in the sort of beginning of round 2. But what if you try all this stuff and Alex Pereira just jumps back out of his sort of prancing stance? Well, what do you do then? There's no real easy answer, but I think one of the best solutions to that is punches into kicks. You see this a lot in sort of European-style kickboxing, or some might want to call it Dutch-style kickboxing. But we've actually seen 2 Eastern European fighters use it quite effectively on Alex Pereira. The first is Adam Vakhtov in kickboxing, pressuring Pereira, and as he's moving back, sort of catching him as he's retreating with kicks, particularly to the body. And Jan Blachowicz was also effective in doing that. In fact, Jan actually likes to do that to a lot of his opponents. I mean, famously, he did a lot of damage to Dominic Reyes with that. Because when you're so concerned about the power coming forward with the hands, you're maybe not focusing on the legs, or you think that you're out of range. An experienced kickboxer that knows what their range is going to be able to throw a kick behind a multi-punch combination that might not even be intended to land, and they're going to be able to do some damage. And this is all softening up the body, getting points. This is all something that's going to help in terms of attrition throughout the fight, especially in a 5-round title fight. And what about those pesky low kicks? Well, as Alex Pereira's continued through his rise in the UFC today, we see that not only does he have a vicious left hook, but people are actually starting to appreciate that he has a very, very sneaky calf kick, which hits with a lot of power. that doesn't really have much of a wind-up compared to a lot of other fighters. And even such good defensive low kickers as Jan Blachowicz have actually struggled to get a read on when the low kicks are coming. What I would suggest to anyone that's fighting Alex Pereira is to use same time counters to the low kicks, sort of jumping in with punching combinations, things like that. Stuff that's going to discourage him. You might even catch him on one foot and drop him. It's going to discourage him from throwing the leg kick in general, which is what you want. Jan Blachowicz had some success on this. It was a little bit more difficult for him because he hasn't got the fastest feet in the world. To use an example of a faster fighter, Khalil Roundtree had a bit of success with this and actually gave Alex Pereira some problems with it. And it's probably worth touching on what would be the ideal defensive posture for the person that's fighting Alex Pereira in general. I still think that the most effective way to deal with him is a classic high guard. Jason Wilness used this to pretty good effect. There's some problems with, say, like a Yuri Prochazka style, having your hands low. That obviously didn't work out for him very well, no matter how much success that he had in the first fight. And, you know, when you look at his light heavyweight run, who is the only guy that Alex Pereira hasn't knocked out? Well, that's Jan Blachowicz, and he actually managed to keep his hands up. He sort of has a very parrying style. It's not quite as tight as a traditional high guard. But one of those two options is probably the best to deal with Alex Pereira, because you can throw punching combinations with relative safety. So you're not trying to sort of throw one big hook that's going to knock him out, but you can go from a high guard and just shoot out a couple of punches and then get some more decent offense once you've, you know, cracked him with a jab and have him stunned for like half a second, or even if you want to like switch up to a level change or something like that. I know I did say to strike with him, but yeah, you know, you can level change body shots. Let's just say that's what I mean. Now here's where things get a little bit more interesting, particularly in regards to Alex Pereira's upcoming fight with Magomed Ankalaev. Now, for those of you that maybe aren't super familiar with Magomed Ankalaev's game, he can wrestle, but he is primarily a southpaw kickboxer. Don't let the Dagestani origins fool you. He's not a member of Khabib's team. He's not anywhere near as capable a wrestler or grappler as any of the guys that train with Khabib, Islam Makhachev, so on. He's not a bad grappler by light heavyweight standards, but he's nothing really to write home about, you know. Like, he's not as effective as, say, like a Glover Teixeira. Obviously nowhere near, say, like a Daniel Cormier or a John Jones in terms of grappling offense. And also he seems pretty hesitant to use it. The crux of Magomed Ankalaev's game seems to be largely a slightly more offensively minded version of sort of like a Mirko Krokop, southpaw triple attack, high, low, middle with the left foot, using a left cross to punish people. He does seem to get them on the back foot a little bit more than Krokop was trying to do, whereas Krokop was trying to sort of pull you into a big shot. But there are some definite similarities there. Why this is interesting is that when I was in the process of doing my study, I found that there were a lot of particular vulnerabilities that Alex Pereira had to southpaws, and they're things that weren't really available to orthodox fighters or fighters that refuse to switch stance. That doesn't mean that he has an overall weakness to southpaws. They still have to be very good. I mean, Jamal Hill was fighting from a southpaw stance and got finished off by Alex Pereira pretty quickly. It doesn't mean that Magomed Ankalaev is necessarily just going to blow him out of the water just because he's a southpaw, but it does open up a few more options for him, and those options that I'm going to explore right now. Alex Pereira is a orthodox fighter. He almost never switches stances. When facing a southpaw, that means that the striking matchup is always going to be in a open stance matchup. So for those of you that maybe are less familiar, a closed stance is when two fighters of the same basic stance, that is orthodox versus another orthodox fighter, or southpaw versus another southpaw, are in front of each other. So both of their front hands will be on the opposite side of each other. When you've got a open stance matchup, both lead hands will be right in front of each other. Both rear hands will be quite far away from each other. And so contest over the outside foot position is going to be key. That means that there's always going to be a lot of jockeying for position in a open stance matchup between any competent fighters. There are tricks that can be used from the inside position. I think Alex Pereira is actually particularly dangerous from the inside position against a southpaw because of that short left hook. But it doesn't mean that any southpaw such as Ankalaev should intrinsically surrender the outside foot position, because there are definite things that can be of use. One of the offensive moves that is open from a open stance matchup against Alex Pereira is the lead leg low kicks, particularly to the outside of the calf. It's going to be a lot more difficult for Alex Pereira to throw his rear foot and to land effectively with calf kicks, because that's all going to be dependent on position, and it's going to have a little bit further to travel and therefore be a little bit easier to notice. Roundtree was pretty effective at landing lead leg low kicks, so he probably should have done it more. And even Jan Blachowicz, who's typically an orthodox fighter, did actually have one or two moments in their fight where he shifted into southpaw and effectively kicked Alex Pereira's lead leg. One of the other big elements of a open stance matchup is that body kicks become much more important. They are much easier to land clean than they would be in a closed stance matchup. So whoever has the outside foot position is going to be able to just whip in really, really hard kicks from their rear leg. That goes for both Alex Pereira and his opponent if he's fighting a southpaw. So this is going to be very interesting to see who gets the better of this in the fight with Ankalaev. I actually would have to sort of look back on it, but if I recall correctly, Ankalaev actually does throw a good amount of body kicks and also even tries to set up high kicks off of it as well. So that's going to be really, really interesting. And unfortunately, though, for the southpaw, their liver is a little bit more exposed than for the orthodox fighter. So one of the small instances where being a southpaw is actually a little bit of a disadvantage in general in fighting. But I think it's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens there. The most notable practitioner of southpaw body kicks against Alex Pereira was actually Israel Adesanya. Almost every time he threw them, they effectively landed. He has a particularly good southpaw body kick. It's much better than his orthodox one, which is kind of strange because despite being such a switch stance fighter, he does seem to be right-handed, but I guess he's left-footed. But anyways, he's not in this fight. But I do think that southpaw fighting Alex Pereira would actually be very well coached to go heavy on landing those body kicks and then working other offense off of that. There is also some sneaky hand fighting techniques that can actually be utilized against Alex Pereira in a open stance matchup. So this is a pretty common thing that you'll see when you have open and closed stance matchups against each other, is that lead hand battle becomes really key, because if you're able to occupy that lead hand, you can actually control the angles at which you're able to attack. And you might be able to land a perfect left straight on an orthodox opponent and they're unable to reach you with the right hand, or vice versa if they happen to get the better position on you. So, that being said, we've actually got a couple things from Bruno Silva here, which he had a big fall off, but he had a pretty good performance against Pereira, and prior to that he was looking really, really good in the middleweight division. That must have done a bit of damage fighting Alex Pereira because he just didn't seem the same after it. But anyways, in the fight against Pereira, he was pretty effective at using an uppercut while occupying the left hand. So using his right hand to sort of play with the left hand, distract, and then throw an uppercut down the middle. Lead uppercuts can always be a little bit risky, but if you're able to sort of parry the lead hand of Alex Pereira across, then it will partially hide the trajectory of the uppercut towards the orthodox fighter. So that's definitely something that could be utilized. Magomed Ankalaev, I'm pretty sure, actually has a pretty effective uppercut. Most of his punching mechanics are pretty good. So that's definitely something that we could watch out for in this upcoming match. Both Bruno Silva and Israel Adesanya were also pretty effective at utilizing the lead cross to close distance. So when I say lead cross, I mean in terms of its order. So throwing in the case of a southpaw, left hand cross first. So different to the classical 1-2, which is jab cross from either stance. So when you're using a lead cross, it is a pretty dangerous thing to use against an orthodox fighter. It's sort of a classic southpaw weapon. You'll see like Conor McGregor as a really good example of using a lead left hand. It's threatening with a really dangerous weapon, and what you'll tend to find is that most orthodox fighters will move backwards to try to just stay out of range of it. This actually can lead them to either being susceptible to a lead cross. So for a southpaw fighter, that would be a right hook. Or it can also just be used to sort of walk them around the cage, get them closer to the fence, or get them where you want to. So this is something that would be well utilized in this upcoming match if Ankalaev were to use that. I imagine he probably will, maybe not consistently. Consistency is always a little bit of a problem with him, but he is generally pretty well schooled in using his hands, and we did see him back up Rakic to the fence a lot with these sort of lead cross combinations, so I wouldn't be surprised if we see him at least attempt to do that against Alex Pereira. The degree of which he'll have success is to be seen. Bruno Silva was also very effective at using a lead hook counter to Pereira's jab or dipping rights. So what you'll find often with Alex Pereira is that he will use jabs, whether to the face or to the body, and often dipping rights to the body in order to bring the opponent's hands down or to otherwise create openings for his left hook. We saw that really effectively when Alex Pereira knocked out Sean Strickland. He went body jab, got that right hand coming down, and then swung around over the top with a left hook and knocked Sean Strickland out. Famously a pretty hard guy to actually land clean on with boxing. So what you'll find is that with those open stance matchups, the lead cross off the hand fight like we were talking about just before, when Pereira throws that jab or throws that right, he's necessarily getting his hands to come down a little bit, or at least away from his face if he's jabbing directly outward. So that means that sort of little lead right can be thrown around the jab and connect. It can also be used just to discourage him, and it can also put Pereira in a place where he isn't able to really counter with any offense. So you can push him out of the pocket by throwing a cross after that. It also is something that can maybe open up some clinch wrestling or something like that if you're going for that. But again, we're going to leave the grappling outside of the purview of this particular episode. Pereira's a boogeyman. Get him scared. One of the things to always respect whenever you're in any striking matchup is the threat of a high kick. It is, perhaps more than any other strike, the one that's most likely to just finish the fight right there, no matter how well it's been doing. If anyone that's especially a large person connects on you, shin to dome, chances are you're going out. You have to be some sort of fused neck freak like Yoel Romero to maybe get away with that. But certainly it's possible to land high kicks on Alex Pereira if someone is dexterous enough with their rear leg. Roundtree kind of got him with one, sort of. But I think Magomed Ankalaev has a better high kick, so I think that is more of a possibility in this match than it otherwise would be. I did find that Bruno Silva effectively used a high kick counter to Pereira's body jab. We've already spoke about how Pereira likes to use that body jab to try to sort of soften people up, set them up for the left hook. If he's made pretty gun shy from throwing it, if every time his hands come down or he's crouching down into that body hook because he's so tall he has to actually bend his knees to get down there most of the time and keep decent distance away from the opponent, then there is a good chance that left high kick connects right on the temple and puts him out. It is certainly a threat that he needs to take seriously. So I think any southpaw that is fighting Alex Pereira should really be doing that. You need to get Pereira off his game. You need his comfortable weapons to not be working for him. You need to create a little bit of chaos, or at the very least a bit of discomfort, to then exploit the vulnerabilities in his game. Because I do think that as scary, as intimidating as he looks and as experienced as he is, like any fighter, he's only human. There are ways that he can be intimidated away from utilizing certain elements of his skill set. This next one's a little bit more simple. I think that southpaws can pretty effectively use knee stomps against Alex Pereira. It's at least something that's worth trying. Obviously, if you're dealing with a really big, tall guy that sort of prances in and out of range, it's always nice to take the wheels out from under him. I don't think that Alex Pereira actually shells up particularly effectively when forced to. So if he can actually be tracked down and made less mobile, he is actually not the most difficult guy to hit. Now, hitting him without getting hit back, rather, is where the trouble is. But I think that it would be wise to use knee stomps. Roundtree did it actually a couple of times effectively. And I think that Magomed Ankalaev probably won't do this very much. Maybe he'll try it once, but it is probably something that any southpaw fighting Alex Pereira probably should try out. Another counter that was pretty effectively used by Roundtree actually was the jab counter to the low kick. So this is something that could be done from either stance, but I do think that the open stance matchup makes it a little bit easier because the extra time taken for the rear leg low kick to land means that you're more sort of worrying about the lead low kick, which is going to have a little bit less power on it, but with Alex Pereira is still a legitimate threat, let's say. But by using a jab to counter the low kick at the same time, you see that leg move just step forward and give a lancing jab out. You'll not only sort of knock him off balance a little bit and force him to reset, but you can also potentially open him up for further attacks, whether that's a left cross down the middle, or whether he sort of bounces back out of the way and you catch him with a big body kick on the way out, or maybe even if, say, Ankalaev does this in their next fight and is really fortunate, maybe even a head kick that closes the show. So I do think that, again, like I said earlier in the video, discipline him, make him worried about a counter to the low kick. Don't just let him get away with it. I know it's easier said than done, but we're talking high-level fighters here. This is something that they can make happen. I think basically the problem is with Alex Pereira a lot of the time is that he is obviously a really, really great fighter, but a lot of time people almost get in there and they're a little bit mentally defeated and they're scared about everything he does. The initiative needs to be taken from him in order to dominate him in the striking department. There's a couple other techniques that I also want to briefly touch on that I actually think could be effective against Alex Pereira that haven't really been tested. So the first is a single leg into overhand, particularly from southpaw. So again, I know that we said we weren't going to get into the grappling elements of it, but this is just faking the single leg takedown in order to sort of get that down block going and then swinging a big left hook over the top in order to sort of catch him upright. The single leg is kind of going to force him to stand at least somewhat upright over it in order to maintain his balance, because he's going to be trying to hop around on that planted rear foot. Another instance that another technique rather that I thought might actually be effective is the casting punch. So the casting punch is mostly used by practitioners of Sambo. Most famously, Fedor Emelianenko had an absolutely vicious casting punch. So what a casting punch basically is it is a type of overhand typically, but instead of throwing with a sort of 90-degree angle in the elbow or a sort of tensed up arm, what you sort of do is you rotate the sort of cuff in the upper part of your arm and you whip it over. So it tends not to land with quite as much power as a regular punch, but it can take people unawares and it tends to add a little bit more reach. So someone might be pulling back and thinking that they're out of range and get connected by it anyway. Also because of the sort of arc in which it's thrown, it tends to land by the temple, which is one of the best places that you can actually land a punch. Fedor was able to do it especially well because he was not only crazy fast, but really, really powerful. So even though it doesn't quite pack the punch of a sort of more tight traditional hook, it is able to actually do a lot of damage when thrown by a big guy, and particularly if it's well placed. So I guess we might as well get to the matchups part of the video. I've sort of outlined here the kind of techniques that are most effective against Alex Pereira. So obviously the ideal person to outstrike Alex Pereira would be someone that utilizes all of these different techniques with regularity. There is no such fighter in the roster at the moment. So what's the closest that we get? Well, when I came into making this video, I actually thought that my answer was going to be Jan Blachowicz. He's an extremely experienced fighter. I actually felt that he probably should have got the decision when fighting Pereira in that 3-rounder. I mean, he signed up to do the fight, but I don't think it did him any favors having it at altitude, given that his gas tank's never really been the best. And I think that he sort of lost that fight on optics more than anything else. But when I actually got into the weeds technically, I do think that I agree with the consensus that Magomed Ankalaev is, at least in theory, the most difficult potential matchup for Alex Pereira in the light heavyweight division at the moment. Not because of the sort of traditional attitude of, okay, well, he'll wrestle and take him down. I actually expect him to have a lot of difficulty taking Alex Pereira down. And I don't think he'll be able to do it with consistency. I mean, if you're Alex Pereira, it only makes sense to be constantly trying to shore up your wrestling because you've already got world-class striking. You're a legitimate striking threat against anyone in the big man divisions of the UFC. In fact, the only person that I would, really expect to outstrike Alex Pereira relatively easily would be Tom Aspinall. And that's not because of technical nous, that's just because of speed and size. And, possibly Alexander Volkov could be awkward because Pereira is so used to typically being the bigger fighter. And even though he has sort of had fights against like Yusrei Belgarui, he's never looked that great in those, and he's taller than Pereira. And Volkov's a bit bigger than Belgarui in terms of like mass as well. So, but that being said, Pereira has a legitimate chance against either of those guys. But to bring it back to the light heavyweight division, I think that Jan Blachowicz is probably the most consistent technician and is able to put together the parts of this game plan that are more sort of suited to orthodox fighters and a couple of the southpaw things. But I really do think that when fighting as a southpaw against Alex Pereira, it opens up so many more possibilities. It doesn't mean that it's impossible to lose. Obviously, he's beaten southpaws in the UFC. He's beaten southpaws in kickboxing. The left hook is also an underrated anti-southpaw weapon. If you can maintain outside foot position, you can actually toss it around the end of a lead hook. But I think with Magomed Ankalaev, one thing that's actually prevented him from becoming light heavyweight champion already is poor decision making in the cage. I actually think that he's very, very well coached. I think that when you actually see his striking mechanics, they are typically very good. I think that he has been trained to utilize certain techniques when his opponent uses, when my opponent does X, I do Y. When they throw a right hook, I step back and step forward and throw a left cross. But I don't think he actually knows why he's supposed to do it. He just listens to his coaches and goes, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. Now that should bode well, but when things start getting difficult in the cage or there's anything that gives him worry, some of the decision-making can start to fall apart. I mean, I've seen several performances of Magomed Ankalaev's where his corner is literally screaming at him between rounds, going, you're way better than this guy. What are you doing? Why are you still leading in this fight? And Pereira's power and accuracy makes it really, really dangerous to not be doing the right thing or to not have complete confidence in what you're doing and what the game plan is. I don't take much focus into pre-fight talk. I know Ankalaev has been saying all the right things. I'm going to embarrass him. I'm working so hard, etc., etc. How many times are we going to fall for that in MMA, Magomed Ankalaev may well win this fight. I do actually like Alex Pereira, but I'm a massive fan of Yuri Prochazka. It was my first video on the channel was about Yuri. And for him, obviously, it's good if Alex Pereira loses to Ankalaev because Ankalaev hasn't fought him, whereas Pereira's beaten him twice. But I do lean towards Alex Pereira winning this fight. I do think the consistency and the experience and the confidence and the fight IQ are going to carry him through this. There probably will be at least some moments where it looks dangerous. But I do think if Magomed Ankalaev does even half of the things that I've set out here in this video, it may actually be a pretty dominant victory. And everyone's been doubting him. Everyone's been saying, you're stupid if you stand up with Pereira, and if he actually manages to go out and do it, then good for him. I hope that you've enjoyed this video, people. I'm sort of trying a few different things with this channel. I know it was a slow upload rate. I've had a couple of things going on in my personal life that have actually distracted from this channel. I hope to get a more regular upload schedule, and I hope that you've enjoyed this sort of more concise look at things. If my voice sounds at all weird, I'm sorry. I came down with a little bit of a cold today. But nevertheless, I hope that you guys enjoyed this. And please like or subscribe. It really means a lot if you would subscribe or like the video just to get it out there and to help build the channel. I'm sort of trying to create a little bit of a podcast here with a consistent community and the people that are really, really wanting to go into the depth of the sport and want to learn about the history and that. There's all these other channels that do, the gossip or what's the new Dana White announcement. I'm not really interested in doing all that. That's great for them. I know I'm never going to be as big as those channels, but I'd like to have a little sort of boutique niche here on YouTube doing this. And it would be nice if I can eventually get up to a point where I'm at least able to make a little bit of money out of it, for my time. Thank you, everyone, again. I'm Josh from Dialectical Violence. I hope you have a great weekend. I hope this upcoming fight answers a few of these questions. I hope it doesn't make me look like a complete idiot, but I'm sure it won't. And I really appreciate all of you that have taken the time to actually listen through this whole thing. I also want to do a little bit of a quick shout out. to people that have a lot bigger platforms than me, but who have been of assistance in this video process. First of all, Vampiric Legs, he's got a great YouTube channel. If for some reason the algorithm sent you here and not sent you to him, please like and subscribe to his stuff. It's really interesting, much more regular schedule than me, all sorts of different topics. And also to Brian Campbell of Morning Combat. He was nice enough when I reached out on Instagram to actually give me some advice about how to sort of make my voice sound more interesting, and how to make my podcast a little bit more engaging and less dry. Hopefully I'm in the right trajectory. I know that I'm not quite there yet, but thanks to BC for answering questions from little old me when I know that he's pretty busy dealing with Luke Thomas's meltdowns. Anyways, folks, peace out. Enjoy the fights. Cheers.